In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to format your paper using APA 7th edition. I'm going to cover everything you need to know, including margins, font settings, line spacing, headings, referencing, and much, much more. I'm also going to share with you our free APA template, as well as some other awesome tools and resources to simplify your writing process. So let's get started. Hey, this is Derek from Grad Coach. If it's your first time here, the Grad Coach channel is where we cover everything academic research and writing related. In this video, I'll be using our free APA template to walk you through the requirements and how to set up your document for APA 7th edition. If you want to grab a copy of that template, you can find the link in the description. As I mentioned, that's completely free, so feel free to go grab a copy there. Alternatively, we do also offer a comprehensive editing and proofreading service where you basically send us your paper and we do all the legwork for you to make sure that it is 100% APA aligned and aligned with any other requirements that your university has. If you want to learn more about that, again, you can check out the link in the description. First things first, I want to clarify that APA 7th edition has slightly different requirements for student papers versus what they call professional papers. In this video, we're going to look at the requirements specifically for student papers. This will cover pretty much any paper you'll need to submit as part of a degree program, including something like a dissertation or a thesis. If you are looking for information about APA 7th edition for professional publications, in other words, not the student version, you can check out the link in the description for a second video that covers exactly that. All right, so here we have our document, a dummy student report, which is formatted in APA 7th. I'll take you through this. So first things first, let's talk about the sections. Let's talk about just the main chunks that will need to go into a document to be APA 7 formatted. So the first thing you'll have is the title page, which we've got over here and we'll dig into in more detail. Then the next page that you may have is an abstract. And the reason I say may have is because this is not always required by the university, but in some cases it will be required. And in such cases, that would be the very second page. Then from there, we would typically move on to the main body of text. And this could be any number of pages long. And depending on your university's requirements, you might then have the next section covering footnotes and tables and figures. But this is pretty uncommon because generally speaking, you won't use footnotes and tables and figures will be included within the document. So we haven't included them in this section, but just something that's useful to be aware of. Then the next major section is the reference list. And this is where you list out the full details of all of the resources that you drew on in your paper. And then last but not least, you'll have your appendix or your appendices, which will provide supporting data or whatever the case may be for your specific paper. So with that out of the way, let's dig into a little bit more detail. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the generic setup of the page. So things like margins, fonts, and line spacing. So in terms of margins, the APA 7th requirement is that you have a 1-inch margin all round, and you can find that in Word by clicking on layout and then clicking margins, and you'll see that the standard option, the standard layout for Word documents is 1 inch all round. So that should be set by default. If you are writing a dissertation or a thesis, there might be a slightly different requirement here. You'll need to check with your university, and the reason for that is that they might just need a slightly larger margin on the left-hand side to accommodate for the binding, for the physical binding of a dissertation. Then in terms of font, you have a few options. Here you can use your standard sans serif fonts such as Calibri in 11 point. You can use Arial in 11 point. You can also use Lucida in 10 point. And if you want to go the serif route, then Times New Roman, the classic in 12 point size is fine. Georgia in 11 point is fine. And Computer Modern, which is the default font for LaTeX, is also fine in 10 points. So those are the pretty standard fonts that you would use, and I would recommend sticking to them. Again, you might just want to check if your university has any specific preference in that regard. The next thing that you need to pay attention to is the line spacing, and APA 7th, the requirements are that you have double line spacing throughout. And you can find that over here in the paragraph section. Mine is a little bit compressed because I'm using a small window. but you can click on paragraph and you can click on this little icon, line spacing, and you can see that that is set to 2, which means double. What's worth noting there as well is that you should not have any extra space after paragraph. So you can click this option here, remove space after paragraph. And within figures, if you have figures in your document, you can get away with using single spacing or 1.5 size spacing. You might just want to check what your university requires, but that is only within figures. So do be aware of that. Last but not least, in terms of initial page setup, you need to set up your header. And specifically what you need in your header is just the page number in the top right-hand corner. And that needs to show for all pages, including the first. Now, for some reason, Word Online Edition doesn't show the page number being set up here, although it is set up. So I'll just open that up. And there you have the page number in the top right corner. All right, so now let's take a look at the actual sections, at the actual pages that you will need to create. So let's look at the very first page that you will need to cover, and that is the title page. The title page is simply covering your title of the paper and some details regarding yourself and the institution that you're submitting this to. So to start off your title page, you'll have 4 blank rows. And then on the 5th line, you'll type your title, and your title needs to be bold-faced and it needs to be in title case. And there is a very easy way to get the capitalization right for title case, which is to use a title case generator, and we'll include the link for you to that. And with the title case generator, you just insert your title and it will do the capitalization for you. So you don't need to figure out what is uppercase and what is lowercase. So from there, next line, you would have your subtitle if a subtitle is required, and that too would be centered and would be bold-faced. You'll then leave a blank line and you'll write out your full name. You'll write out the department that you're submitting this to and the university that that department is part of. On the next line, you'll write out the course code and the course name, followed by the next line, which will have your professor's name. And you want to have that in whatever their standard format is. So if they go by the name of Professor XYZ, or if they go by the name of Dr. XYZ, or if there's no prefixes, keep it consistent, use whatever they prefer. Last but not least, you'll include the due date for your assignment, for your report, and all of that is standard text, centered, double spacing, and no boldface. From there, we can move on to the next page, which is the abstract. And as I mentioned, this isn't always required. And so if this isn't something that has been specified by your university, don't waste your time writing up an abstract. Nevertheless, if you do need to include an abstract, you need to start off the page by including a title, and that would be bold-faced and centered. Then you will start your paragraph of abstract content. And note that this paragraph does not start with an indent, which is quite different from the rest of the paper, and we'll get to that shortly. In terms of the content of the abstract, it'll always be, or it should always be, a single paragraph. There shouldn't be any headings, there shouldn't be any citations in this, and you should aim for about 150 to 250 words. And the abstract should just be a very brief summary of what your paper covers. The final component that you'll include on your page or on your abstract page is the keyword list, and you can see that the formatting for that is quite specific, and that is that one, you need a 1/2-inch indent for the keyword list. The word keywords needs to be italicized, and then your keywords need to be listed here, usually 3 to 5 keywords that are highly relevant to your specific paper. These keywords should be separated by commas, and there is no full stop, no period at the end of that list. So those are just fine details that you need to keep in mind as you write up this keyword list. From there, we can move on to the good stuff, which is the main body content. This is the heart of your assignment or of your report, and this is where you're going to earn the marks. So the way that you kick off this page or this section is by copy pasting your title and subtitle. Once again, exactly the same format, which is centered, bold-faced, and in title case. And then you kick off your first paragraph with an indent. So you can see here, there's the 1/2-inch indent. And it's worth noting that your first paragraph has no heading. You don't need a heading, for example, introduction. You can just get started because it will always be assumed that the very first paragraph is the introduction. Then the next thing that we need to pay attention to is the matter of headings. Now, there is a very specific format for different levels of headings. within APA 7. And for that, I'm just going to quickly switch over to the APA site so we can look at these in practice. So APA has 5 levels of headings specified, and hopefully you'll never need to get all the way down to the 5th level, but if you do, it's all specified. And every heading level has very, very specific formatting requirements that you really need to pay attention to. So level 1, which is obviously the most common one that you'll use, is centered, it's bold-faced, and it uses title case. The text begins on a completely new paragraph, and that's worth noting because some of the lower levels, the text begins on the same paragraph. Moving on to level 2, this is now flush left, there's no indentation. It is bold, it is title case, and the text begins on a new paragraph. So the difference between level 1 and level 2 is, of course, the left versus center positioning. Then for level 3, it basically is the same as level 2, except it is italicized. And then level 4 and 5, this is where things start getting interesting, is that level 4, you have an indent of a ½ inch. It's bold, it's title cased, and it ends with a period. And that is quite noteworthy because that period allows you to then start the text on the same line. So this is a little bit unusual. If you think about headings, you usually think about a heading being on a separate line above the text. But for level 4 and for level 5, it starts on the same line. Level 5 is the same as level 4, except that it is, of course, italicized. And again, the text starts on the same line. So do keep in mind that there is very, very specific formatting required for each of the headings, and we will link to this page in the description. One other thing to take note of with regards to headings is that they shouldn't be labeled with any numbers or letters. They should just be written out in text, and you want to use a sensible number of headings. Don't go over the top. Don't feel the need to use all 5 levels. Typically, you'll just be using level 1 and 2, maybe 3 within a typical paper. Next, let's look at the text styling and the language requirements that you'll need to use throughout your paper. So you'll notice here that there is a single space after each period, and that is all that you need. Be careful not to put double spaces in between your sentences. You'll notice that the Oxford comma is used whenever listing out 3 or more items. That's an important one to remember. Then in terms of using words for numbers, in other words, in terms of spelling out numbers, the rule is to use words when you're writing any number that's less than 10 or when you're starting a sentence. Related to that, your fractions should be written out in text. In other words, don't use the symbol or the numbers, just write it out as 2/3 or 3/4 written out in text to describe any fractions that you are mentioning. Also related to numbers, you'll use numerals for any numbers that represent time, dates, ages, or money. You don't need to write those ones out or spell those ones out. Then when it comes to the tone and the style, you want to use active voice as much as possible as opposed to passive voice. You want to avoid using contractions and colloquial language and excessive jargon as much as possible. And you want to try avoid using any sort of biased language. You want to use bias-free language as much as possible. And there's quite a lot of detail involved with regards to that bias-free language requirement. So we'll link the resource below that provides a lot more information about how to write using bias-free language. The last thing to look at with regards to the body content is, of course, citations. And citations are really, really important in APA. You've got to make sure that you, 1, are citing all your sources. Of course, that's important in all academic writing, but 2, that you are using the exact specification that APA requires, and that is known as the author date system. And so if you look at all the citations here, you'll see that everything is always the author and the date of the publication, the author and the date of the publication. So it's worth pointing out here that with APA, all of your citations are in line, they're in the text. In other words, you're not using footnotes, you're not using any sort of numbers or symbols to reflect references to certain works. Whenever you are referring to something, you will just use the author and the date system in line in the text. Now, there are 2 types of citations that are allowed within APA, and these are called the parenthetical citation, and that is referring to citations within parentheses or brackets. And that's what you see here. And a parenthetical citation is placed at the end of a sentence in brackets, as you can see here. And the second type of citation is the narrative citation, which you can see over here. And a narrative citation basically just means that it is more integrated into the sentence. So you can see here that it's actually part of the flow of the sentence. And so in this case, all that is parenthesized, all that's put in brackets is the year, not the author last name. Another important point with regards to APA citations is that whenever you've got 3 or more authors in a resource that you're referring to, you will trim that off and simply type in et al. So you can see up here, this is Judge et al. 2001, which means that there were 3 authors, and the lead author, the first author, their name was Judge. And so just keep that in mind, is that you do not go and write 3 authors' names out. You just say et al. And then in your reference list, you'll unpack all of that. A final point with regards to citations is that if you are directly quoting someone, if you are directly quoting something from a journal article or any other sort of resource, of course, you will put that text into quotation marks. And then one other adjustment that you'll need to make is that you'll need to have a page number specifically reflecting the page that that quote was taken from. And so that will be included in your citation within parentheses and look something like that. Okay, so that covers the core text and formatting requirements for your body text. And that means that we can move on to the next section, which is the reference list. Now, the reference list starts on its own page and it needs a heading, references in boldface, centered, and then you will include your full reference list. Now, there is a lot of detail. There are a lot of requirements in terms of how your reference list needs to be formatted out. And that is a huge topic, which we'll cover in a separate video. You can check the description for a link to that video. So what I'm going to do in this video is just cover some of the basics. So the things that you need to know off the top is that your reference list needs to be ordered in alphabetical order based on the last name of the authors, or the lead author rather. And that every reference needs to include the author element, the date, the title, in other words, the title of the piece of work, and then the source, in other words, which journal did it come from. And you can see here that in this reference specifically, that all of those components are included. From a formatting perspective, you'll notice here that each of these references is using a hanging indent. And so that means that the first line is completely flush left aligned, and then everything that rolls over the full line is indented a ½ an inch. Now, as I mentioned, the reference list needs to be structured and formatted in a very, very specific way. What I would suggest, or what I would strongly recommend that you do, is to not write out your references manually. This is just a recipe for disaster. What you want to do is use a reference manager, something like Mendeley, something like Zotero. Those are completely free, and they allow you to basically just drag and drop your resources into your document, and it'll be formatted perfectly out the gate. We have dedicated videos covering those 2 specific softwares, and those softwares are completely free and they're easy to use as well. So I would really recommend that you use a reference management software to ensure that all of this is taken care of. Otherwise, 1, you're just bound to make so many mistakes, and 2, you're going to burn a lot of time doing really menial work. So as I say, you can check out those resources, highly recommended, in the description below. All right, then we get to the very last section of a typical paper, and that is the appendix or the appendices. You can see here that the heading structure is once again centered, bold-faced, and we have an appendix letter, appendix A in this case, and this is followed on a new line by the appendix title. And this is obviously dummy content, but nevertheless, you can see that this is following title case. So as with everything else, all of the headings, you need title case. The paragraph will have an indent for the first line. And so the appendices essentially follow the same formatting requirements as the rest of the document, or at least the body content section of the document. One really important thing to remember when you're using appendices is that you need to refer to them within the body content of your documents. In other words, you need to point the reader to them. So if you're going to make some statement in your body content, and that statement relates to something in the appendix or can be supported by something in the appendix, then you need to, in brackets, say something like see appendix A or see appendix B for further information, or something along those lines. Do not let your appendix be an orphan. Do not let it sit on its own. It needs to be incorporated into the document. And also keep in mind that quite often your appendix will not be mark earning. So your appendix will contribute towards supporting the sort of core arguments that you're making within your document, but generally you're not going to earn marks off of it. So don't try to just stuff your appendix full of information that you couldn't squeeze into your document because of word count, for example. All right, so that covers the basics of how to format your paper for APA 7th edition. Please do keep in mind that here we've gone over some of the most common aspects of APA, but naturally we haven't covered every possible scenario and every possible requirement. After all, the full APA manual is 400 odd pages long. So if you've missed anything, or if we've missed anything that you need more information on, just pop a comment below and we'll do our best to try and help you out. Alternatively, as I mentioned, you are more than welcome to get in touch with us regarding our full service, our done for you editing service, where we take care of all of the APA formatting requirements and send you the finalized document. If you're interested in that, check out the link in the description. One last thing to point out, and this might be obvious, but it's important for me to say, is that if your university has specified anything that contrasts with what we've discussed in this video, please do follow their guidance and their requirements. Some universities or programs will have slight variations on the standard APA requirements, and you want to make sure that you follow those to the T. All right, so that's a wrap for today. If you got value from this video, please do hit that like button to help other students find this information. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll probably enjoy some of our other videos, so please do subscribe for more tips and tutorials regarding pretty much everything research and academic writing related. Until next time, good luck.